Victor Wembanyama and Rudy Gobert know each other well. They share the French national team locker room, and Gobert has called Wembanyama his little brother. But starting Monday night, that relationship gets put on hold. For the next 2 weeks, they'll be trying to end each other's season. And Gobert just said something about guarding Wembanyama that should have Spurs fans paying attention, and Timberwolves fans a little uneasy. I'll give you my full series prediction later. But first, it's worth looking at how both teams got here, because their paths to this matchup explain almost everything about how this series could unfold.
Guys, put it behind his back. Trying to extend a 7-0 run. Spin it on out here. Oh, the line in the basket. Oh, Wemby.
Close out and eliminate Denver.
Oh, my goodness. TJ Shannon punishes the rim.
What the Minnesota Timberwolves just did to Denver is going to be talked about for a long time. Game 6 was supposed to be Denver's reset, their chance to defend home court, force a Game 7, and regain control of the series. Instead, Minnesota walked into Denver shorthanded, exhausted, and down multiple rotation pieces, and still ended the Nuggets season with a 110-98 win. That makes the result even more impressive. Anthony Edwards was out. Dante DiVincenzo was unavailable. Ayo Dosunmu, who had become one of the biggest stories of the series after averaging 30.5 points in his 2 starts, was sidelined by calf strain. Kyle Anderson was ruled out before tip-off. Naz Reid was playing through shoulder and ankle issues. Bones Highland was banged up too. Minnesota basically entered a closeout game with an 8-man rotation, and even that group wasn't fully healthy, and they still controlled the night. The story of Game 6 was Jaden McDaniels, and Terrence Shannon Jr. McDaniels delivered one of the best playoff performances of his career, finishing with 32 points and 10 rebounds while spending most of the night making life miserable for Jamal Murray. On the other side, Shannon was thrown into the starting lineup and immediately looked ready for the moment. He finished with 24 points and 6 rebounds, but the numbers only tell part of it. What stood out was how relentlessly he attacked. Again and again, he went straight at Murray, forcing him to defend every possession, making him work, making him absorb contact, making every trip down the floor heavier. By the fourth quarter, it was obvious the pressure was taking a toll. Doris Burke said on the broadcast that she would trust Shannon over Mike Conley late because his speed, combined with the Gobert-Reed-Randle frontcourt, was something Denver simply could not match. 2 minutes later, Shannon buried an and-one that effectively ended the game. But the bigger story wasn't one possession. It was the entire series. Minnesota simply played harder. Denver had its own problems. Jamal Murray never found rhythm, shooting just 4 for 17 in Game 6 and only 35% from the field across the series. Aaron Gordon missed stretches. Peyton Watson never fully factored in. Those things mattered, but they don't explain away what Minnesota did. The Timberwolves won the physical battle from start to finish. They beat Denver to loose balls. They controlled the glass. They made every half-court possession uncomfortable. This was a Nuggets team that led the NBA in offensive rating during the regular season at more than 122 points per 100 possessions. Against Minnesota, they failed to reach 100 points in 3 of the 6 games. That doesn't happen by accident. A huge reason was McDaniels. His length, timing, and discipline completely disrupted Murray. Across the series, Murray shot just 26% from 3. At some point, that stops being a slump and starts becoming a matchup problem. McDaniels has clearly become one of the few defenders who can genuinely change the math against him. And then there was Rudy Gobert.
Got the feature role tonight. Edwards! Oh, he's a Skywalker!
The promise around the Minnesota Timberwolves was always simple. Wait until the playoffs. For stretches of the regular season, they looked disconnected. There were nights when the energy dipped, the offense stalled, and the urgency just was not there. Back in February, this did not look like one of the most dangerous teams in the Western Conference. It looked like a talented group still searching for consistency. But now the playoffs are here, and suddenly that version of Minnesota feels distant. The team that drifted through parts of the regular season has become one of the sharpest, most locked-in groups in the West. The physicality is back. The defensive pressure is back. The edge is back. Now comes the reality check. The injuries are brutal. Dante DiVincenzo is out. Anthony Edwards is unlikely to be available for Game 1. And even if he does return, the obvious question remains. What version of him are you getting? Against Denver, Minnesota could survive with a smaller margin for error. Against a team waiting in the second round, that margin almost disappears. Because this next matchup feels bigger than just another playoff series. In a lot of ways, the Western Conference has felt like it has been orbiting around the San Antonio Spurs all season. For Spurs fans, this moment carries real weight. It has been 9 years since their last playoff series win. 9 years of rebuilding. 9 years of patience. 9 years of waiting for signs that the next great era in San Antonio was actually coming. Now it is here. When the season started, there was optimism, but it was cautious optimism. This was supposed to be another step forward, another glimpse of the future. It was not supposed to be full arrival. Then they closed out Portland in 5 games. Game 5 was complete control from opening tip to final buzzer. A 114-95 win that never really felt in doubt. But the most revealing part of that game was not the score. It was the fact that Victor Wembanyama took only the 7th most shots on the team. That should make the rest of the conference nervous. Because this is not a one-man operation. The Spurs are not standing around waiting for Wembanyama to rescue every possession. They have a real system. They have multiple creators. They have players who can punish whatever weakness a defense shows. If one option gets taken away, another immediately appears. That balance started showing itself during their perfect February stretch, when everything clicked and the rest of the league finally started paying attention. Back then it felt like potential. It felt like the early stages of something important. Now it feels real. The questions about whether they would hit a playoff wall are gone. The doubts about whether they needed another superstar next to Wembanyama have faded. The idea that San Antonio needed to panic and chase a blockbuster move suddenly looks unnecessary. This roster is the answer. They trusted their timeline. They trusted their development. They trusted the group they built. And that trust is paying off. What stands out most is the depth, the versatility, and the constant adjustments. Portland kept trying different coverages, different matchups, different defensive looks. San Antonio had an answer every time. At the center of it all is Wembanyama. He changes the geometry of the game on both ends. On defense, he shrinks driving lanes, erases space, and makes players think twice before attacking the rim. On offense, even when he does not touch the ball, he bends the floor. Defenses cannot lose sight of him for even a second. His 13 blocks over the final 2 games against Portland were the loudest reminder of that impact. But they were not the whole story. De'Aaron Fox has been exactly what San Antonio needed at point guard. He has already delivered multiple stretches of dominant playoff basketball, reminding everyone why he was an all-star before arriving in San Antonio. His pace changes games. His ability to create downhill pressure forces defenses into rotation. When possessions get tight, he gives the Spurs control. Then there's Stephon Castle. He has become one of the quiet stabilizers of this team. The kind of two-way guard who does not always dominate headlines, but slowly wears opponents down across a series. He competes defensively, makes smart reads offensively, and brings a level of composure that matters in playoff basketball. And Dylan Harper is coming along faster than almost anyone expected. He does not look overwhelmed by the stage. That is rare for a young player. He looks comfortable. He looks poised. He looks like someone who belongs. For a rookie still learning NBA speed and rhythm, that matters. Young players stepping into playoff minutes and producing is not normal. It says something about both the player and the environment around him. That is why this first-round win feels bigger than just ending a drought. Yes, San Antonio finally got its first playoff series victory in 9 years. Yes, the rebuild worked. Yes, the long-term vision was right. But they did not come this far just to make a statement. They want more. And right now, nothing about the way they are playing suggests this is where the run ends. Still, Minnesota is a different kind of challenge. The Trailblazers competed hard and fought through a chaotic season. But the Timberwolves bring a level of physicality that changes the feel of every possession. They put hands on drives. They crowd space. They make the floor feel smaller. Every possession gets heavier. Every trip down the court becomes more uncomfortable. That is their identity. The question becomes, what beats that? Variety. Minnesota's greatest strength is disruption. San Antonio's greatest strength is that they have answers for almost everything. Against Denver, the Timberwolves could assign specific defenders to specific problems. Rudy Gobert could take Nikola Jokic. Jaden McDaniels could chase Jamal Murray. That is how Minnesota operates, elite resistance built around personnel and matchups. But San Antonio does not present 1 or 2 creators you can simply target. Fox can take over a game one night. Castle can swing momentum over a few possessions. Harper can settle an offense when things start getting messy. Different players can tilt different matchups. That is what makes the Spurs difficult to scheme against. And lurking behind all of it is Wembanyama. Honestly, San Antonio may be at its most dangerous when Wembanyama is not dominating the ball. Not because he becomes less important, but because his off-ball gravity is so overwhelming. Every cut, every screen, every roll forces defensive attention. Every movement changes spacing. Every possession bends around him. Portland felt that all series. They competed, they pushed, they stayed aggressive, but San Antonio kept finding new ways to attack. Pace, movement, counters, pressure from different angles. By Game 5, you could see it on Portland's faces. They had run out of answers by Game 5. You could see it on Portland's faces. The fight was still there, but the belief was fading. Every adjustment had already been answered. Every run had been met. By the fourth quarter, it felt less like a closeout and more like a team realizing it had run out of solutions. That is what makes the Spurs dangerous. And Victor Wembanyama's regular season tells you exactly why. He led the league in blocks again. He was an All-Star starter and MVP finalist and locked himself into both All-NBA First Team and All-Defensive First Team. At just 22 years old, he anchored a 60-win season and became the center of one of the best two-way teams in basketball. That is not normal. Usually players his age are still learning where they fit. Wembanyama is already defining how opponents prepare. He is already dictating spacing, tempo, and shot selection on both ends of the floor. But Minnesota has real advantages of its own. The biggest one is experience. This is the Timberwolves' third straight trip to the second round. They have already been through back-to-back Western Conference Finals runs. They understand how playoff series breathe. They know momentum does not stay still. They know a 7-game series can change completely from one night to the next. More importantly, they know how to survive ugly games. That matters. San Antonio is young. A lot of these players are stepping into this level of playoff pressure for the first time. And there is a reason playoff experience gets talked about like currency around the league. Because it is. When the pace slows down, when the possessions get heavier, when one quarter can flip the emotional direction of an entire series, experience becomes part of execution. Minnesota comes in as the underdog, and rightly so against a 62-win team. But that will not stop them from throwing everything they have at Wembanyama and the Spurs. And they still have real size up front. Rudy Gobert remains one of the most disruptive defenders in basketball. His presence around the rim still changes the geometry of possessions. Drivers think twice. Guards pull up earlier. Passing windows shrink. But there is another layer here that makes this matchup especially interesting. Gobert knows Wembanyama. They share a French national team locker room. They have practiced together. They have talked through defensive coverages, offensive reads, and spacing concepts. That familiarity matters. Gobert understands Wembanyama's angles. He knows when to shade. He knows when to stay attached. He knows how to challenge without overcommitting. He knows when to slow the game down and when to take away rhythm. If there is a defender in the league with actual reps, film memory, and real data on Wembanyama's tendencies, it is probably Gobert. But even with that, the challenge remains enormous. Because on the other end, Wembanyama just spent 5 games overwhelming Portland. Opponents shot only 19% on contested attempts against him in the series. He finished with 16 blocks. Across his first 4 career playoff games, he became only the 3rd player since blocks became an official stat in 1973 to 74 to average at least 20 points and 4 blocks. The other 2 names are Brook Lopez and Alonzo Mourning. That is rare territory. And it is not just the numbers. It is the way he changes possessions. He turns normal shots into uncomfortable shots. He makes passing lanes disappear. He forces offensive players into split-second decisions they do not want to make. Even Shaquille O'Neal recently called him the first perfect big man the game has produced. That might sound dramatic, but you understand the idea. Wembanyama is not just a rim protector. He is not just a scorer. He is not just a floor spacer. He combines all of it, and that is why Minnesota's edge is not only size or experience. It is fight. That is one thing that has bothered San Antonio at different points this season. Teams that crowd space, attack passing lanes, and make every possession feel physical have occasionally pushed the Spurs out of rhythm. Minnesota has the length and the physicality to do that. Gobert's presence means they will not be intimidated in the paint. McDaniels can disrupt passing angles. Julius Randle can bring force. Minnesota has enough defensive size to make Wembanyama work. But the bigger concern for the Wolves is personnel. San Antonio's guard rotation has been one of its biggest strengths all year. Minnesota is running out of healthy guards to match it. If both teams were fully healthy, this would feel much tighter. Instead, Minnesota is trying to survive elite perimeter pressure with a depleted backcourt. With Anthony Edwards and Dante DiVincenzo sidelined, the burden shifts everywhere. Suddenly, more ball handling gets pushed onto players who were not supposed to carry that responsibility. Rotations tighten. Minutes rise. Fatigue builds. That is where San Antonio can apply pressure. De'Aaron Fox can collapse a defense with pace. Stephon Castle can make every touch uncomfortable. Dylan Harper gives them another creator who can settle the offense or attack a weak point. That matters because playoff series are not only about stars. They are about how many places pressure can come from. And then there's Edwards. His status changes the entire feel of this matchup. He hurt his knee against Denver, and while there is optimism, there are no guarantees. Everyone understands what he gives Minnesota offensively: shot creation, downhill pressure, isolation scoring, late clock solutions. But his defensive activity may matter just as much. Against Denver, he made multiple momentum-changing plays rotating to the rim, contesting in transition, and closing space from a weak side. One of those efforts was the play where he got hurt. Against San Antonio, that kind of two-way presence matters even more. The Spurs want to run. They want to get out before the defense gets set. They want to create early mismatches. Edwards is one of the few players who can help neutralize that. Without him at full strength, Minnesota's margin shrinks fast. For San Antonio, the obvious question is Wembanyama's workload. They have shown they can survive stretches without him during the regular season. But playoff basketball is different. Rotations shorten. Possessions matter more. Physical, where builds faster. Against a Minnesota team that just spent 6 games punching Denver in the mouth, that becomes a real variable. The bigger concern may actually be offensive rhythm. There will be stretches in this series when the Spurs' offense looks stuck. The pace slows, the spacing tightens, easy looks disappear. That happened at times against Portland. The difference is that Portland did not have the shot creation or defensive pressure to punish those cold stretches. Minnesota does. If San Antonio loses rhythm for half a game, the Wolves absolutely have the ability to steal one. That is what makes this series interesting. The Spurs have pushed themselves into legitimate championship conversation. They have passed every test so far, and each one keeps reinforcing the same idea. When they are clicking, they overwhelm teams. When Wembanyama looks every bit like a franchise centerpiece. His approach has been steady, mature, and composed under playoff pressure. The young core has not blinked. The guard rotation has held up under intensity. When everything is functioning, this is one of the most balanced teams left in the field. Structure, depth, top-end talent. That is not a hot streak. That has been their identity. And there is another layer that gives this matchup something extra. It feels symbolic, almost cinematic. On one side is Rudy Gobert, one of the defining defensive centers of his era. On the other is Victor Wembanyama, the next great French big man, already pushing the boundaries of what that position can look like. It feels like a passing of the torch moment. The most meaningful French-on-French playoff matchup since the Tony Parker era ended in San Antonio. Nobody on Minnesota seems more aware of that than Gobert himself. After closing out Denver with 10 points, 13 rebounds, and 8 assists, he was asked about facing the Spurs.